chemistry. The last chapter of chemistry for the year is chapter 11. It's about gases. This will be the information and material which you will need to know for your final. All right, in order to study gases, you have to understand this word right here, and that word is pressure. Pressure is force per unit area. All right. So the unit for pressure is, if you recall from physical science, the standard international unit for force is newtons. The standard international unit for area is a meter squared. Okay? So 1 Newton is equal to a kilogram meter square per meter, kilogram meter per second squared. And again, unit area is meters squared. So when we add all of this together, we get we get pressure is equal to newtons per meter squared. How many newtons of pressure do we put on per meter squared? And 1 Newton per meter squared is equal to 1 Pascal. That is the standard international unit for pressure. And I always like to give this example when we're talking about pressure. If I'm standing here in the classroom, I'm putting a certain amount of force in newtons on the ground. That force is equal to my weight. Okay, if I'm standing here in my sneakers, which I am right now, my sneakers, the area of my sneakers looks something like this. So here's my sneakers, okay, and here's the area over which the force of my body is pushing, okay? So that's a certain amount of area. We can figure out what it is, not terribly easily, but we can. Okay, all this area. Okay, now, if I change shoes, okay? If I put on some stilettos, girls, you know what that means. Boys, that means tiny little heels, okay? And I'm standing on this floor in my stilettos, all of a sudden, is my force any different? The amount of force that I'm exerting on the floor any different than it was when I was in my sneakers? No, my weight hasn't changed, all right? I'm still exerting a force that is equal to my weight on the ground, but what has changed? Well, what has changed is the area over which I am exerting that force. Instead of this, now the force over which I'm exerting, the area over which I'm exerting this force is now much smaller, all right? There are my heels. This is the area. Compared to this is much smaller, right? So because the area over which I'm exerting my force is smaller here, this is smaller, the pressure goes up. And girls, you've had this experience before. What does that do? Well, if I'm walking along wet grass in my sneakers, I stay on top of the grass, right? But girls, you've had this experience. When you're walking along soft grass with your heels on, what do your heels tend to do? They tend to sink in. Not because you're exerting more force, your weight isn't any different, but because you're exerting more pressure, because the area is different. The amount of meters squared is smaller. All right, so that's the difference between force and pressure. All right, you need to understand atmospheric pressure, and we'll talk about it in the next video.